I think that's like the biggest lesson, is to listen to your intuition, which for me, I'm realizing was my curiosity. It was like literally sniffing my way through to like the next steps and meeting people that lit me up and then going in that direction and just keep going in the direction that really spikes that enthusiasm, spikes your curiosity, and you really have no idea like how quickly, like things can go in your favor when you do that.
Welcome to the Chingona Revolution podcast, where we will bring out your inner badass Latina, overcome self-doubt, help you gain clarity, and pave your own path, all while leading with courage. I am your host, Latina coach and speaker, Erica Cruz. Hello, friends. Welcome back to this week's episode of Chingona Revolution podcast. If you are watching the video version of this, then you will see that there are some Pokemon posters behind me and some planets behind me. And I am obviously not in my office. I'm in my nephew's room. So I am taking care of them this weekend. I'm taking care of my niece and nephew, and I'm really getting a little taste of what it's like to be a mom. I'm sorry, it's not the weekend just yet. I've been taking care of them from Wednesday, and I will be here through Saturday. But I mean, morning drop-offs, getting them ready for school at night. I mean, I already knew I was going to have a whole nother level of respect for mothers after these few days. I was going to say this week. It feels like a long week, but it's not. It's only a few days. But let's get into today's episode because I interview a guest who is amazing. So Arielle and I had not known each other until this podcast recording, but we were introduced by Leanne, who is a good friend of mine and hers, and somebody that I just absolutely trust. She will be on the podcast soon as well. And when she made the introduction and I saw the different topics that we could possibly talk about, I knew we had to have this podcast interview. Arielle Diaz is a Peabody and GLAAD-nominated TV writer and producer whose work includes GENTEFIED, which we can find on Netflix, With Love, which is on Prime Video, and The Last Man on Earth, which is on Fox, and so much more. But beyond the screen, she's a storyteller with a soul and is deeply committed to wellness, ancestral reclamation, and creating narratives that heal, empower, and reflect our full humanity. In this podcast episode, we talk about her nonlinear path to Hollywood, how she went from Google to Hollywood to being the screenwriter and now an angel investor. There was definitely a moment during the podcast interview where, in that movie Step Brothers, where they're like, did we just become best friends? I feel like we totally had that moment once we realized how spiritually aligned we both are, how we've both really taken a path to reach our goals that doesn't seem logical, but more spiritual. And I'm excited for you all to listen to this episode because she dropped so many gems. Her story is it's very unique, right? But everybody's story is going to be unique. And if you take anything away from this episode, it's that we can't control the step by step of how things are going to turn out in our lives and how it is that we are going to reach our goals. And at some point, we really do have to trust and lean into our intuition and lean into curiosity. So with that being said, let's get into the interview. Arielle, welcome to Chingona Revolution podcast. I'm so excited to speak with you about storytelling, spirituality, Hollywood, angel investing, all the amazing things. How are you today?
I'm so great. Thank you for having me. I've been watching or listening to your podcast, and I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited for the robust range of the topics that we're going to talk about today, because as soon as I saw spirituality as well as Hollywood as well as tech and angel investing, I was like, yes, this is all my stuff. So before we get into some of those, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, about your upbringing, and anything that you feel comfortable sharing with us? Like, what shaped who you are today?
That's a great question. So, I mean, Currently, I am a TV writer and producer. I've been doing that for nearly the last decade, mainly writing comedies and sitcoms on television, some on Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus. My very first show was on Fox TV, which was a delightful show called The Last Man on Earth. Before that, I was working in tech at Google. And largely, I was shaped by where I grew up, which was in the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago, born and raised. My mom was also born and raised in Chicago. My grandparents are from Mexico, and my dad is from Mexico. And um, I would say that I grew up really shaped by my culture because I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood that was primarily Mexican American, some Central Americans as well, but mostly Mexican. Um, but even that like had its own very unique Midwestern like culture to it. I want to say it's very specific to Chicago culture. In the same way that I think like when I moved to LA, I saw that like the Mexican culture in LA is very specific to LA, and the same thing with Texas, and like Mexicans in Texas
Totally.
have their own subculture. So it's very distinct. And only recently have I really started to reestablish a relationship with Mexico itself and that land specifically, and really reconnecting with the land where my dad was born and where my grandfather was born as well. And yeah, so I want to say that I never really started to think about even that question, like what shaped me or like what really formed me until I got to Hollywood. And I think that the reason for that being is that people really ask you to package yourself in like a way that is not normal if you're just going about living your life. And what I realized that started to mean it was that you were packaging yourself against a backdrop of whiteness, to be honest with you. So it was, I never really thought of myself as like Mexican American or like any, like there was no pre-qual. I just grew up where everybody was like me. So there was no otherness until I kind of had to step into this space where, people wanted to know who I was, and I had to kind of package it in a way that they would understand. So anyway, that's a very winded answer for like
No, this was
what
so
shaped
good.
me.
This
but
was so
it's
good.
but there's so much nuance to that question, and it's really for me. What I've noticed is that it shifts depending on who I'm talking to,
Yeah.
and how to answer that question.
Yeah, definitely. You're so right that when you grow up in an environment where everybody around you is similar, you don't think of yourself as other until you find yourself in different environments. And I
Yes.
can relate to that experience because I grew up in a community that was mostly Mexican as well. Actually, it was pretty diverse, but it was mostly individuals of color.
Yeah.
And when I went off to college and then started working in the tech industry, I was the only person who looked like
Hmm.
me. And I realized I was the only person who didn't come from money. And I never had felt like poor until I was
Yes.
in that environment. But anyway, back to you because there's a lot of things you touched on that I want to ensure that we come back to. But you broke into Hollywood with no
Mhm.
formal connections. And
Yeah.
I'm curious. So, looking back, what's one thing that you would, well, first, how did it happen? And then what would you do differently? And then what's one thing that you were really proud of now that you look back?
Yeah. Um, Thank you for these questions. They're great. How did I do it? Oh my gosh, that was such a like not a linear path, because I also not only did I not have formal connections in Hollywood, I also didn't have formal education in screenwriting, which is what I do. I write television. I'm a TV writer. Um, so I went to college in the Midwest. I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign Urbana, and it's very far from Hollywood. Like it's just not. It's the focus of what it's known for is engineering and agriculture. So we're very famous for our top tier corn, and that's about it. So it was. a long shot from Hollywood. I did not study it, but I knew that I wanted to be a writer going into school. I thought I wanted to be a journalist, and my college career was largely shaped by circumstance than anything else because I didn't get into the School of Media or the College of Media. And I had to pick something because if I didn't pick something, I was going to have to do a fifth year of school, and I certainly didn't have the money to do a fifth year of school just because. So I was like, I need to pick something, and I really love to travel, so I picked tourism, and it was a major called Recreation, Sports, and Tourism. I focused on tourism management, and I was like, I'm going to be a travel writer, and I had no idea what that meant or how I was going to do it. But what I ended up doing was I ended up in advertising after college, and I knew right away that that world, like specifically the way that it existed in those times, like the pandemic has changed corporate life in so many ways, but at the time it was like you go into an office, you work a 9 to 5 job, you work with in this space with like really bad lighting, and it's really cold, and you're there from 9 to 5 in a cubicle, and I knew like just like in my whole body that that was not for me, and was just like as soon as I started working in that environment. And essentially I just felt like I needed to break out. And so I did this thing early in my career, like in my early 20s, I did this thing called Out of Office Revolution, which was a newsletter that was also a career experiment. And I knew that I was really interested in tech at the time. And so I was really fascinated by the idea of rapid prototyping and like design thinking and doing like design sprints. So I was like, I'm going to do that with my career. I'm going to like, experiment and find out like what I like to do and get to my MVP, which would be like, what's the MVP of my career, like a role that I would like to do. And I'm going to do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So I did that, and I did that by following a bunch of people on Twitter, RIP Twitter. But at the time, Twitter was still like kind of a new platform. This was, like back in like I'm going to date myself, but it's like back in like 2013 era. So early social media.
Yeah.
I'm just like tweeting at people that I find interesting that I'm reading about in online publications like Entrepreneur Magazine and like Forbes, and like finding out what they're doing. And I quit my job. I want to say like before a year was up. I think I quit my job around 7 or 8 months. I was living at home at the time, so I just like put away a bunch of money, and I started asking for micro apprenticeships and asking if I could bring people like coffee or lunch to their office. But I was asking like these people that lived in New York. I was asking people who were in LA, people who lived in San Francisco, and meanwhile I was in Chicago. And so as soon as somebody would agree to meet with me, I would buy a plane ticket and I would fly to their city. And then I would buy them coffee or lunch, and I'd ask them questions, and I'd like get to know people that way. And at the time, because it was a career experiment, I wasn't looking for a job. I was just curious and looking to build an MVP. Like, what do I want to do? How do I put together something that like I would want to, pursue? And so people were, more than not, some people did say no, but more people than not said yes. And that's how I started to build my network. And so during that time, um, people in Hollywood were people that I'd also been reaching out to, specifically like executives. And I was really curious about what they were doing and like how they worked in the TV ecosystem and what the TV ecosystem even was. And what I didn't realize was that those meetings are called generals, and that's kind of Hollywood speak for the meetings that your agent normally sends you on. But I was booking them myself at the time.
This is
And
incredible.
Erica, I was so naive to like any of this. Like, I had no idea how it worked. I was so green. I had no idea how Hollywood worked, but I think it really served me that I had no idea, because I didn't know that there was a proper way to go about doing things. And I was just curious, genuinely curious, that like there was no pretense in my questions. I was not trying to like weasel my way into Hollywood. I was just like I was just asking questions like, what do you do here? And people were receptive. So that was like early on. And then during that same time period, I applied for a tech incubator that was at the time done through TED and like TED Talks
Mhm.
and the Stanford Design School, and it was based in New York. And so I applied to that, and it was like based also like its principles were wrapped around design thinking. So I got into that and I spent my that summer in New York, incubating a company with a group of strangers. And it was through that network that I got onto Google's radar. And then through that is how I got recruited at Google. And at the time, I was not interested in pursuing a career at Google. I was at that point, I knew I wanted to be in television, but I didn't have a straightforward path to get there. And honestly, like it just kind of everything kind of weaved in like this perfect kind of way at that time where um, by the time Google asked me if I was interested in a career there and I interviewed there, I was like, that sounds like the more interesting path than to go back to Chicago and, work a retail job or something. I don't know, right? Like, cause I had given up my, my advertising job.
Yeah.
So, I did that. But during that time also, one of the, to rewind a little bit, one of the people that I was trying to connect with at that time was an executive who worked at NBC Universal. And she was also Latina and she was a big advocate for having more diverse voices in Hollywood, more storytellers, more people behind the camera that were telling diverse stories. And I was like, I have to meet this woman. And at the time, she kept like canceling our meeting, or her assistant kept canceling our meeting. And it was like, just kept getting pushed. It kept getting pushed. And until finally, the assistant was just like, she's not going to be able to reschedule with you because she's actually leaving NBC and she's going to Google. And this is around the time, like all of this kind of swirls in my head together all at one time. But basically within that same time period, I got recruited at Google. So we ended up both in the Bay Area, both working at Google. And
Literally, I got chills as soon as you said that. You cannot plan these things.
no,
Wow.
no, that's what I'm saying. Like my path was so not standard. It was so not like the usual path. Like it took me to a different career trajectory, to a different city to meet with this mentor who took me under her wing because I reached out to her once we got to the Bay Area, and through our internal system at Google, I pinged her, had coffee with her, both of us now as Googlers. And she was, my mentor, my Hollywood fairy godmother. Like she really like took me under her wing. She was, truly like, it was like having like a Thea, like in tech, but also like in Hollywood, like somebody just to like look after me, but also just who had my back and who like
Wow.
really, was my advocate in those times and showed me the ropes and like how things worked. And so when it was time for me to leave Google, because early when you're that young and working at a tech company, you're either you get to a certain point where you're either going to go on a management track or you're going to go to B school. And I didn't want to go to business school. And for me, that was like, okay, this is my time now to do the thing that I want to do. And she kind of helped me make that transition. She introduced me to my now agent, and she sent me on my first generals, my official generals. Now that I knew what that meant, and at that point, that's kind of when it happened. It was all happened within a year, and it was crazy because I didn't know any. Like when I left Google before I had any opportunities in Hollywood. I was going to take the year to focus on my writing, to like get more samples out, to like really just, do the work. And it ended up happening a lot faster. I came back to Chicago to finish the comedy writing program that I did at the Second City before I got recruited at Google. But then before I could finish that program again, I ended up getting a fellowship, a television writing fellowship in Hollywood. And so things just kind of snowballed from there. And I know I kind of like skimmed, over it a lot, but it was kind of wild because usually to break into Hollywood, like to get your first shot on a television show where it's like a real, like something that's produced, something that people have actually seen.
Yeah.
It's like a 10-year kind of thing. You keep at it. Some people are assistants for years and years and years. And looking back when I like to answer now your last question, what am I most proud of is that like I look back and I'm like, oh my God, like I really made that. I really broke in one without knowing anyone, without having like, an expensive film school like education, but also like I did it in under a year, when people spend years at it. And when you say like you can't plan it, like you really, really can't. Like it happened in the most perfect way for me. And I don't know necessarily if that's repeatable, and if anyone can take anything away from it. It's not that like, oh, I need to go, work at Google and then meet someone, or like, it's not that, but it's that you to stay so connected to your intuition, and to the opportunities that may not make the most logical sense, because your logic is not really going to it's not the fastest way to your dream, but like your intuition is. And so for me, like, I think that's like the biggest lesson, is to listen to your intuition, which for me, I'm realizing was my curiosity. It was like literally sniffing my way through to like the next steps, and meeting people that lit me up, and then going in that direction, and just keep going in the direction that really spikes that enthusiasm, spikes your curiosity. And you really have no idea like how quickly, like things can go in your favor when you do that.
Wow. I wrote down a few things while you were talking because I wanted to make sure I came back to them. So the first thing is, um, I coach women, I coach Latinas, and I coach them in supporting them in reaching their goals. So I specifically call myself a courage coach. And the thing that I see with Latinas over and over, or just with my clients in general, is that they want to know the how and they want to know the exact plan to get to where they want to go. But what I love about your story is that it points out exactly how your journey is never going to be linear and it's never going to look like anybody else's. And what you said about how your logic isn't the fastest way to reach your goals, it's through listening to your intuition, 100%. And I mean, obviously, you've always been very spiritually connected to like follow your intuition and whatnot. But your story is such a beautiful example of how you could have easily given up on the dream of being a writer when you weren't accepted into that school. And you didn't choose that. You found a different way. And the other thing that I wrote down is curiosity over control. Like you
Mm-hmm.
really looked for following your curiosity instead of controlling the outcome and controlling how things were going to work out. And then the last thing I wrote down, just because I was like, I don't know if some people know this, but MVP in tech stands for minimum viable product. So it's, in other words, it's like, what's the
Yes.
cheapest, fastest way to get to your goal? And for the people who are listening that are in my program, this is your ghetto first draft. That's what we call it in my
Yes.
program. We're like,
I love
how,
that.
yeah, get to your ghetto first draft, the fastest, cheapest way. And you did such a good job doing that through leading with curiosity, through allowing your curiosity to guide you, because your curiosity really is your intuition. And whenever people are having a hard time listening to their intuition, the answer is curiosity, which is exactly what you mentioned.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 100%. And also, I mean, that's such a good reminder, because even like I could tell you probably when I was neck deep in that journey, that I could tell you I wasn't as zen or sure about about
Of
it.
course.
I was like, what's happening? I hope this is right.
Yeah.
Um, so gosh, I would also go back and tell myself to have so much more grace and compassion, and just know that, it's supposed to feel scary. It's supposed to feel, now I know that, right? Like now I know, like, oh, okay, yeah, this is it's like training, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
that was, you don't know it the first time around, but now you're like, oh, it's supposed to feel scary the whole time. It's never not going to feel scary. It might feel to a lesser degree scary, but the nerves kind of don't go away. Um, so yeah, I think intuition is curiosity, but it's also, it speaks in all sorts of ways. It could speak also in your enthusiasm,
Yeah.
which, like I realize too, it's like this inner like lighting up feeling that I feel when I hear someone speak about something or read about something. Like sometimes it like rushes through my body, and I'm like, I have to stand up because I'm so excited, and
Yeah.
and that's information as well. But I think that sometimes, myself included, I find myself in situations where I think that there's like this like godlike voice that's supposed to be telling me like, yes, you're on the right path, or like this is the right thing to do. And it's almost never that. It's always like what we're saying, curiosity, enthusiasm. And sometimes it's even more subtle than that. Sometimes it's so quiet you barely hear it. But
Yeah.
that's kind of like, that's a whole other thing that we have to be available for. We have to like be so tuned into our bodies and to our nervous system, have calm nervous systems, for us to
Exactly.
like hear that subtle, more subtle intuition.
Definitely. I feel like we could end this podcast right now and it was already a great interview, but luckily we still have time. So I have a question on intuition just because a lot of people who are listening, I think we're just so conditioned in society to follow the right or the wrong path. And we're almost conditioned with our educational system put to believe that there's always a right or wrong answer. And that's never the case with our intuition. And what you said about people, or like even us, I feel the same way where sometimes I'm like, just give me a clear sign. And it's
Yes.
sometimes it's very much a whisper. So in order to be able to listen to your intuition, do you have any practices? Do you meditate? Do you journal? Do you go on walks? What are some of the practices that have supported you in listening to your intuition?
Yeah, this is a great question because I feel like the last year of my life has really been focused on that word specifically, practices. I worked with I don't know what you want to call him, maybe a coach, but he was honestly more like my sensei, like it's what I was calling him, on nervous system. What would you say, like not maybe some repair, but honestly like nervous system coaching, like somebody who really took me through a series of practices to how do we tune in to a regulated state so that we're choosing our state. It's not something
Mhm.
that is always contingent upon the outside or external world, and I really needed that because I found myself at the beginning of 2024 in a very uncertain place. Like, I had just come off of the 2023 strikes, the Hollywood strikes. There were writers, directors, actors, all
Yep.
of us. We were not working.
Yeah.
And, that ended at the end of the year. And then, which is a time when the industry is always just quiet anyway. So, really coming into 2024, there was a lot of uncertainty. And
Mhm.
instead of going back to Hollywood, I spent the year in Mexico, which is like a whole other story that we can get back to. But um, I met this
That was literally my next
sensei.
question for you. So if you just go ahead and elaborate, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you about.
Yeah, I had like kind of a wild ride in 2023. I had my first plant medicine journey that happened as a deeper level healing to the path that I was already on because I was dealing with chronic illness from 2021 to 2022, and then in 2023 I just kind of reached like a plateau in the healing that I was doing through very deep nutrition and like just physical practices, functional medicine, nutrition, that kind of thing. And I reached a kind of level where I was like, I kind of just hit this, yeah, a plateau where I was like, I felt like I was staring at this glass wall and I could see the other side, but I couldn't get to it. I couldn't like push past it or even like walk through it. And I was like, there has to be I could see it. I know there has to be brighter colors on the other side, and there's like vitality on the other side. There's like life and joy and playfulness, and it's crazy because like plant medicine really did come into my life. I didn't pursue it. I wasn't looking for that, um, and I went to Peru to do on an for an ayahuasca retreat. Something that came into my life through reconnecting with a friend who I hadn't seen since my Google days. It had been 9 years, and we reconnected. And there was one space left in the retreat she was going on, and I, like just said yes. My whole body said yes, and that really just like one. I mean, after that experience, like all of my symptoms were gone. On physically, from a physical standpoint, it was just gone.
Wow.
Um, and that had been from having 2 years of like, trying to figure, going through doctors to specialist office, doing different protocols. And so that was like a miracle on its own. But then when the strikes happened, it was like all of a sudden I had this time and my health back. And so I went and I was traveling. I, was in a new relationship at the time. I was really just kind of living my life and having like, like really reclaiming the years that I feel like the pandemic and, those first few years of in isolation um, took away. And I ended the year just kind of in a space with a lot of questions where it was like, okay, well, now that I'm healthy, now that I feel connected to something much deeper, and I feel transformed in a lot of ways. Like, what now? Now, what do I want to do? Can I go back to my old life? Is it? The answer for me was no. I don't think I can. I don't think I can just go back to LA and do the grind of looking for another TV writing job. And I had a message that was very clear for me at the time. That was to go back to Mexico. That was to reconnect with my ancestors and to reconnect with like the original mother. And so for me, that was the land, that was earth, but that was, like, it was very clear to me that whatever journey I was on, that it was for me, it was going to be in Mexico. And looking back, I can see how one does not need to be in a specific country in order for, because it doesn't matter. I could have had this healing anywhere, but that was my intuition guiding me. There was, like, for me, there was something that I needed to see and experience through that land for me to reconnect with what I needed to reconnect with. And so that took me to Mexico. But in that experience, like, I met somebody around a fire after Temescal. And for people who are not familiar, but Temescal is something that is an indigenous practice, ceremonial practice in Mexico, but also in like Native American communities as well. So like it's something, it's called a sweat lodge. And then the further south you go, it's a temescal. And it's essentially just, like, it's so hard to describe because on the surface it's like a sauna, right? But
Right.
but I don't know if you've ever done one, but it's facilitated by a shaman, and there's 4 doors, and the process is like this detoxification that happens, and every 4 door is a representative of something else that you are purging, and then also of what you are calling in, and you are working with your ancestors the whole time. And there's usually like also medicine, like different herbs involved. um, and so I met this person who I just felt intuitively like had something to teach me. And I didn't even know at the time that he was a coach or that he was somebody who like worked with people. I just felt like I needed to learn something from him. And I didn't reconnect with him until a month after that. Um, and we had a conversation just kind of about, like, where I was in my life. And it just made sense to work together. And we spent the whole time just working on practices on connecting with intuition. And so there was a zazen practice, sitting practice, which is a style of meditation that we practice. I also practiced apart from him, but as a result of working with him, encouraged to go on a Vipassana meditation retreat, which I did, which is, oh my gosh, like, I recommend it. If you feel called to something like that, like, I can't recommend it enough. But it's a 10-day silent meditation where you're meditating for 11 hours a day in total noble silence. You're also fasting. It's a whole experience. Um, and then we also worked through nutrition. So like there's a lot of things that the food that we eat can, in a lot of ways, if it's not clean, if we don't have a relationship to our food, it can like really like clog our channel, and it blocks like those messages that we're getting on a daily basis if it's not a clean channel. So nutrition, meditation, um, also doing things like stuff that's like actually really simple, but a lot of people don't think about it. But like washing your dishes and like cleaning your floors and like doing your laundry, folding your clothes, like all that stuff puts you into like a flow state.
Yeah.
And when you're not thinking, when you're not in your mind, but you're like doing something with your physical body and you're doing it in a very repetitious way, you are a perfect channel to be receiving messages in that moment. And so something that like he taught me that really blew my mind, because coming from starting my career in the Bay Area, everything is about optimization and
Right.
about like what you should be delegating, because because your brain is too big, right? And you need to be doing all these big vision things and not like the menial things that, what we're conditioned to think are menial things, like taking care of your own house. Just insane. But these it's really like it's actually the other way around, right? Like these tasks that we think are not important because we're supposed to be, like having these big vision things, and so we delegate the house cleaning to like someone to clean our house and somebody to cook our food and somebody to walk our dog. And actually it's like we're giving away money, because and not in the sense of like, oh, because we're paying somebody, but because meditation is money. Meditation is like what's generating like these moves that set us on a rapid fire path to our goals and to our desires. And when we're connected to that, and when we delegate that away, we're really like losing time with ourselves. Like for washing our dishes is like a privilege. It's a gift. It's like what it's one, it's an act of service to ourselves, and right, and it shows that like we care and love ourselves because we're taking care of our home. This is like, it should be our sanctuary, our temple. But it's also, yeah, time with, I'm going to call it God because I'm comfortable with that term, whatever it is for, for you or for, anyone listening. It's your time with your higher self. It's your time with God, with the creator, with light, like whatever source, is in those small moments that we often think of as not important, or,
Yeah.
we delegate away.
It reminds me of how whenever people are in the shower and then they suddenly get an idea. Like the name
Yes.
for this podcast came to me in the shower and I was like, oh, I know exactly what it is. Or when I've been washing dishes as well, like after I'm done cooking, after I'm done having like a nutritious meal and I'm sitting there washing dishes, I will have I'll just like make connections. I can feel like, not
Yes.
actually, right? But like the new neural path connections in my brain. I'm like, oh, and things just kind of start clicking. Or I'll have ideas for my business, and even an idea for like a video or a piece of content. And it just kind of hits me, and it hits me whenever I'm doing things like that, where you are allowing yourself to be in that flow state that you talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's creating the spaciousness within
Yeah.
ourselves to receive. And
Yeah.
when we're overbooked, or when we're like too busy to do those things, like we're not available for those messages. So it is about making ourselves, yeah, available for those things, and not to think that we're too good for those things. Like it's a very backwards way of thinking, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I think it's funny that we both started off in tech
Yeah.
and and then ended up being like these meditation, mindfulness, spiritual girlies. Because
It's
it's
so
like
true.
those are two opposite ends of the spectrum. But in order to be as productive as we want to be, like we were programmed in the tech industry, I think what we've both discovered is we do that through the mindfulness, through the non-doing. That's how you actually get more done, which
Yeah.
is like a mind fuck for society today, right? Like, what do you mean? If you do more, then you do more. And it's like, if you let yourself be, then you actually have more space to create and do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's a strange thing because, you know, we already know, like not just from a spiritual perspective, but from just like a scientific perspective, that like time is not real. So
Exactly.
when we pause, it's actually like time like kind of expands, right, with us. Like it's not that we get less time if we stop. It's like the opposite is true. We can create space through the pause. Um, and for me, that's been very transformational for me, because I think like I spent so much of like my early career and all of my 20s, to be honest with you, like really feeling like I had to do, and it's been this practice and unlearning that way of being. um
Yeah.
and even so much so like that, I don't know if you find this to be true, but sometimes even though I feel it, like sometimes if I'm around enough people who are still in that old program, so to speak, that like there's a like a is it I don't know if it's a guilt or like this kind of like I have to explain myself, or like feel guilt, like I have to perform my guilt for doing less.
I totally know what you mean. I feel very seen, heard, and validated in the
Okay.
conversation right now. Because I tried telling some of my friends, yeah, time isn't real, and they just don't get it. And I'm like, well, we can go into the scientific explanation of this, but yes, I totally know what you mean. Whenever we're surrounded by folks who are still in the old program, it's like oh man, should I be doing more? Or like, how do I justify where I am? But I feel like I've tried both ways in my life,
Mm.
and the more mindful spiritual way always leads to more abundance and more
Yes.
productivity, even if it's not happening in that moment. And I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yes. 100%.
All right. So, I mean, I could literally keep talking about that forever, but you briefly mentioned in our conversation about your chronic illness. And that's something that
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you about. So, you've talked about your chronic illness shaping or reshaping your creativity. And how did that chapter in your life influence the way that you now show up in your work?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I got sick, it was I want to say that like the previews for it kind of started to appear in 2019, and it was, I would say that the biggest foreshadowing I think that I got was on it was on, I remember it being on my birthday because I spent my birthday in the emergency room. But I was working on a television show in LA. I was on the Paramount lot, and I went into anaphylactic shock, which, for people who don't know, it's an allergic reaction that you have when your esophagus completely closes and you're unable to breathe. And um, they once I once people figure out what was happening, is I was at work when it was happening. I was in a writer's room. I was rushed to the infirmary on set, and then one of the nurses realized what was happening, and they gave me an EpiPen, and then I was rushed off the lot in an ambulance, and that was the beginning of it. And it was really crazy because I went to an allergist office after the whole incident, and had to be tested for all these things. I had to write down every single thing that I ate because it happened like kind of like around like after my lunch hour in the writer's room. And I got tested for all these things, and everything came back negative. Like they're like, you're not allergic to anything. And so
Wow.
they called it idiopathic anaphylactic shock, which means anaphylaxis without cause, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it. Like, not knowing like what could cause you
Yeah.
to go into anaphylactic shock. So um that was kind of the first of like a series of really bizarre kind of things that were happening with my health. And it was like these kind of different organ systems and different parts of my body that were kind of just in dysfunction from 2019 all the way through the end of 2020. And end of 2020, what I would say, was like kind of where my health kind of hit a rock bottom. And it was coinciding with the pandemic, right? So it was not easy to get, like, in the beginning of 20, like when the pandemic started, easy to get the care that I needed, because there was all these, like, you know restrictions on how many people could be in like in hospitals. And there, the hospital rooms were filling up with people. So it was kind of like scary times.
Yeah.
It was really weird times. So by the end of 2020, I had already been in like specialist office. I had been like poked and prodded, and I had gotten like scans and X-rays and MRIs and like all these different, like, I had seen the inside of my body through all these different, now when I look at it, I'm like, actually kind of cool ways, right? Like, through all these, like, scans and mirroring images. But no one could say what was wrong. Like, everyone was just, they were like, well, you do have these symptoms, but there was no disease that they could, like, diagnose me with. And so my doctors called it a mystery illness, or invisible illness, which is like what a lot of autoimmune conditions are categorized as. And so I decided to take things into my own hands. And also, shout out to my mom, because my mom is also someone who, you know, is, very intuitive. And she was the one, I want to say, she had like gone like through like gone on like this YouTube rabbit hole of like looking for like different things. And she was the one who brought functional medicine into my awareness. And I decided to find a functional medicine doctor and work with a functional medicine doctor. And also, I found like all these protocols online. There was like the autoimmune protocol. So that was like my exploration, and like kind of how I dove into um, like taking healing into my own hands. And it was through food. like food as medicine. And that's kind of like how things started to transform for me. Like I want to say, I also left LA at the beginning of 2021 to stay with my best friend who lives in Puerto Rico. And I was with her I was supposed to be there for 3 weeks. I ended up staying for 3 months. It was so deeply healing to my soul.
Oh, I
But
bet.
yeah, because it was like I'm like, I'd spent 2020 isolated by myself in LA. And all of a sudden I'm like, in the ocean, I have my toes in the sand. I have my best friend, and I'm eating, papaya and like fresh fruit every day.
Yeah.
And my health is starting to come back, like not fully, but it's like obvious improvements, right? Like we're going in the right direction. And that was also what I realized, like how healing nature is, and how important our relationship to nature is, because it was just that like that island is so healing for me. It's been kind of a pattern that I've like found myself on the island, and like in these times when my body needs to be replenished, and it's just always been so good to me. Um, oh my gosh, I can't even like I'm like so deep into like this story. What was your question?
Don't worry, it's a great story. I'm going to Puerto Rico in a few months to see Bad Bunny, and I cannot wait. It is the trip I am the most
Yes.
excited about. But I do find that the universe takes us to the physical spaces that we need to be in. I feel like that's
Yeah.
Mexico City for me. Like I always kind of end up
Mhm.
there when I'm going through a difficult time, and it always ends up being so healing. But
Yeah.
the question was around the your chronic illness and how that has reshaped your creativity.
Oh, okay, got it. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, so the basically like my chronic illness like took me on like a literal physical journey, right, to Puerto Rico, and then I left LA, went back to Chicago, and then it took me to the jungle. And I want to say that like the plant medicine is really what like was like this just went so much deeper, on it's what healed me beyond my physical symptoms. It went to like this energetic, emotional, and ancestral place that really went to the roots and asked me to go like deeper into like my feeling of the things that I needed to feel in order to like process them through my body. And through that healing, and which, like I said, like took me back to Mexico, I feel like the way that it's reshaped my creativity, for one, the way that I access my creativity has changed. I used to, because my profession is in a creative field, is that I think that I used to approach it in this very, maybe this is the right word, like capitalist way, right? Where there was no such thing as like play for play's sake or creativity for creativity's sake. Like it needed to have an outcome.
Hmm.
And it was really shaped by my um, like the trauma of survival and scarcity that was kind of encoded into my DNA, just being from the lineage that I'm from.
Yeah.
And so, because no one in my lineage had the freedom to be able to play, right? And to be able to just freely express, to be able to, to explore, well, to sing the song in their heart. And so I didn't know how to do that. I just didn't, there was just a part of me that felt like I need to produce something. And it was like, if my inner child was the one, who was in charge of this creativity and this play, it was like holding a gun to her head and being like, "You got to do something because we've got to pay this rent in LA.
Yeah.
We've got to pay for the car and for the Melrose apartment. So like, think of something." And that's no way to create, like
Right.
truly. When I think back to those times, obviously, like I was doing it in such an unconscious way. I was so not aware of the way that I was speaking to my inner child, or the way that I was, you know the demands that I was placing on that part of me.
Yeah.
um that like my healing journey, like I've had to have so much compassion for the parts of me that were sick when I couldn't get out of bed, right? When I didn't have the energy, when I needed to be recovering, I couldn't produce that was just not something that was within my capacity at that time. And so I had to have a new relationship with my body. I had to have a relationship with my body and with my creativity and with my, my output that was respecting the seasons that my body was in, that was respecting the natural energy cycles. And that was another thing that I was like realizing was that my body was never allowed to be in a natural cycle where like there's a very like Western and a very capitalistic way of thinking of things that is linear, that goes like in a straight line,
Yep.
and it doesn't honor the cyclical nature of life, um, which also happens to be a very like feminine way to be. And if I would like, I had been existing in a state of constantly overriding those cycles and forcing myself to fit into other production cycles. So I didn't even know like what my like how I wanted to flow, how my thoughts wanted to flow, how my body wanted to flow, and I there's so much more allowance for that to happen now. Like to like where is my mind going? Where does my energy want to go today? And that takes like a certain level of trust that I feel like I've cultivated over the last few years and I'm still cultivating.
Hmm.
But when I have something that like comes up, it's like trusting it, and then like trusting it enough to like follow it down a path, and then not like getting angry at it if it leads to somewhere that doesn't, that if it leads to like a dead end, it's kind of like allowing like following the white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, and like
Yep.
just seeing where it leads you, and maybe it's going to lead you to like a dead end, and then it's like, oh, how do I get myself out of this thing? Like that's creativity, like it's really not having it all figured out. And I don't know if that answers your question, but it's, I think in a nutshell, it's been about like allowing my natural cycles to like come online,
Hmm.
and then trusting that those cycles are going to take me where I need to go,
Yeah.
and trusting and like also giving my inner child like some freedom
Hmm.
and playtime that like takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just been I'm allowing more fun in the process, and kind of like building trust again with that inner child that like just wants to be like, can I just play, can I relax, like is it okay to mess up, is it okay to try and to fail, like it's more of that.
Definitely. I love what you said towards the beginning about creating from this place of scarcity and almost like having to produce versus now creating from this place of like abundance and joy, because the creating is fun, right?
Yeah.
Like it really is supposed to be fun. And sometimes we really try to force creativity for the sake of like getting it out and to be in that linear path that you mentioned. Speaking about creativity, you posted something on Instagram that I found very interesting. I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast are either looking to be on podcasts, or they're either looking to create content or maybe start blogs and things like that. And storytelling is a big factor in all of that. So you posted on your Instagram about how storytelling isn't actually talent. It's about psychology, archetypes, and energies. And you even compared it to specifically writing. You even compared that to pregnancy, which I absolutely love. So can you walk us through how these elements show up in your creative process, or just kind of tell us about that post?
Yeah. So I guess like when I posted it, I kind of wanted to demystify the the process of writing, because I think a lot of people they think like, well, I'm not a writer, or I don't know what I'm doing, or like I've never written anything in my life. And the truth is that we're always constantly living in a story, like our life like exists in a story, and we're constantly going through these archetypes and these story arcs just naturally, organically in our life. Like it's just the way like we are meaning making human beings. So we're natural storytellers. And I would say people, like, they're right in terms of in the way that, like, it's unnatural to write things down. For the longest time we were oral storytellers, not story writers, right? So it is, there is, like, it's a little bit unnatural. But once you when you do want to put it into a writing practice, there is a structure, like, that is as old as time, that every single, like, great story recreates or repurposes. Like, it's like there's no such thing as an original story. Like the story of Jesus Christ, it's the story of Luke Skywalker, and it's just, it goes on and on that way. And so, if I remember the post that you're talking about, like the elements of storytelling, like psychology, it's really understanding our base desires, right? And so this comes from, I would say, any good storyteller should know themselves really deeply. And that comes from knowing your motives, knowing your desires, and also a lot of shadow work. So, like, specifically, like, Carl Jung is somebody who has really shaped my writing practice, because Carl Jung was a psychologist, but also a mystic. And so he worked a lot in archetypes. And that's really, like, where I find the most pleasure and joy in exploring, and, like, I get the most lit up, because human beings are, if we're really honest with ourselves, like, we're, it's not just like what we say we want. Like, there's always something beneath the surface. And if one is not able to understand their own psychology, like what is beneath their own surface, then you're never really going to get to, like, the really good, like, character, like, creation, like character development, right? Like, if to understand, to make a character truly three-dimensional, truly human, you have to get under their skin. You have to understand not just what makes people like them, but you have to make the understand, like, what's, like, their darkness, right? Like, what is, like, what is their shadow? Because we all have a shadow. And so if we understand, like, our base desires, and we understand our deepest fears, and if we understand what it is that, like, really moves us on, like, an emotional level, on, like, a deeply psychological level, then we can create, like, such rich characters. And if you're not like a fiction writer, if you're not a screenwriter, like, it's also like, how do you understand yourself, right? Like, how do you understand, like, your own role within your own life, to know where you are in your own timeline? And, like, really, that's the crux of, like, understanding the psychology of something. In terms of understanding the energetics of something, this is, like, where I compared it to pregnancy. Because, so when we're in our mother's womb, we are connected to her nervous system. We're sharing a nervous system. So everything that is within the, her energy field, and how regulated or dysregulated she is what we're receiving in that time. And then we are basically, like, we have that carbon copy of a nervous system, like, when we're born. We also have, a separate conversation, like, the power to rewire that nervous system. But for all intents and purposes, the energy that our mothers are in is the energy that we were born with. And so the same thing when we have, where we're in the creative process and we have an idea, whether it's for a story or if it's for a business, we have that energy that we're holding within ourselves, that, like, when the idea comes to fruition, it has encoded within it that energy, that nervous system energy. And so if you're creating, like, a business in survival mode, like, or a story in survival mode, like, what you receive on the other side of that is going to be that energy. Like, it's just going to,
Yeah.
like, that's the energy that it will be, like, that you'll find surrounding the project, whether it's the people that you attract to work with you, whether it's, how you launch or how you share the story. Like, it all really depends on, like, the energy that you're in. And if you create something from a place of curiosity, from joy, from, like, oh my God, I love this thing, I can't wait to share it with the world, that is, like, what you also receive back. Like, that's also, like, people will be excited to receive what you're excited to put out. But if you are in this mode of scarcity, in this mode of fear, in this mode of, you know, just deep fear, you will also attract, you will also bring collaborators, you will also bring outcomes that mirror that same energy. So I can't, and then I'm like having trouble remembering the post that, the third thing that I wrote in the post. It was psychology, it was energetics, and there was one more thing.
Frequency.
I think that was the energy.
I thought so too, but that's what I had written down. Hold on, let me look. But I think we get the gist of what you're saying,
Yes.
especially, and I just wanted to tie it back for, I know a lot of people who follow me have a personal brand or they're also coaches and things like that. I know a lot of my clients are aspiring coaches or are coaches. And everything that you shared is even relevant to us and the storytelling that we do on social media. So, for example, people I feel are drawn to me in my podcast because of the shadows that I share. I don't try to come off as this perfect person. Like some of my most viral stuff are about me calling off an engagement or me leaving behind the tech job to do this and moving back into my mom's house and like still being there, right? So like all of these different things that no, I'm not living my ideal life just yet, but I'm bringing you along the journey with me. And I think people just feel seen in my own story, how it's a story of following courage, but like I'm still scared and it's still not
Yeah.
perfect yet. Or what you talked about with energetics, whenever I'm recording content, I can have the exact same script, but based on how I'm feeling whenever I record that piece of content, it's either going to perform the way I want it to, or it's going to totally flop. And there's been
Yeah.
moments when I'm like, I don't know, after a breakup and I'm like forcing myself to do it and I'm showing up and I'm still proud of myself, but the energy behind it is not the energy of creation. It's almost like coming from this lack energy, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that was super, super valuable. And obviously you being such an expert when it comes to storytelling, before, whenever we were in the green room, before we started recording, you also mentioned that you are working with some companies around consulting, right, for storytelling. Do you want to tell us what
Mhm.
that is in case somebody who's listening might be a good fit for that?
Yeah, so specifically within the realm of storytelling, like I really help whether it's a brand, a founder, or someone who is a writer like me, positioning themselves in their own stories, whether they're, so if it's a founder, for example, it would be like helping them position them for investors or for collaborations and like telling their story, but also telling their brand story and like what is um, the origin story and to the conversation that we just had, the energy that they really want to like put out there so that it's crafted in a way that is attractive to the right audience, but and I don't mean the right audience in terms of strategy, I mean in terms of authenticity. um I feel like there is such a distinct difference in, like we were saying, our logic brain, like, oh, it would be so great to be with, to get access to that VC firm or to that brand, but it might not be authentic to like the founder, it might not be authentic to your audience, to your customer, to in my case like a studio or a specific collaborator. So it's really like getting to a place of authenticity and then creating a story that brings that results, that brings to bring like the right, to be a lighthouse essentially, and like to bring that in.
Ooh, I
um
like that analogy.
so yeah, it's kind of like in the chapter, if I had to name this chapter of my life, it'd be like it'd be my lighthouse era, right? It's like this is, I've been out at sea for a while and now it's like, okay, like let's share the stories and like, yeah, but like in an authentic way, which is why like I think even finding you was so interesting because we were connected through my friend Leanne,
Yeah,
um who is amazing.
she
um
is.
yeah, yeah, she's great. Um, so yeah, I'm working with a few people there. It's not, it's really been on a word of mouth basis, which I also feel super, fortunate for. But it's been so fun and something that's been so fulfilling for me. I just made my first angel investment in a company, and so it's just been like a space that I've really enjoyed like being in. And even that, like, you couldn't tell me like a year ago that this would even be something that I was doing because it was just not on my radar. But like when, like I said, like when you're open to like
Yeah.
life And when you really are tapped into your heart, in actual way, like not when I say these things, like sometimes I worry that like I'm gonna come off as like cliche, because I don't mean to speak in cliches, but it's like an actual, like, our heart has an actual frequency. There is an
It
actual
does.
electromagnetic field
Yep.
that it projects out into the world that can attract, like, what's on its frequency. And so um I feel like since I've been able to do that, since I've been in my heart more, I've been like finding that life has taken me in a lot of really interesting directions. One of those being angel investing. And so, yeah, I just made my first angel investment in a period care company. And
Amazing.
yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. And a lot of it has been, like I said, like, because of my own, um, story, my own like journey through chronic health and stuff, like it's like I've gotten to I've had to be so much more mindful about what I'm consuming,
Yeah.
that I've just by accident, like have become like an expert in like these brands that, because I haven't been able to go to like big box stores and get like what, just all the things, there's so many toxic chemicals and a lot of the things that we consume,
Yeah.
that a lot of the innovation that is happening in these startup companies. And so with that, for me, what that lit up was like, oh, I want to be a part of it somehow, right? I want to,
Yeah.
for me, what I find the most joy in is supporting female founders who have a vision, who want to make, the world, um, a healthier place for us to be in. And anyway, the company that I just invested in is called Sunny Period Care, and they're an applicator, a period puppet and applicator company, and um, they are. It's founded by two wonderful women, Cindy and Drew, who are doing a fantastic job fundraising for their company, but also just like being advocates for self care. And yeah, I want to be able to support more women like them.
Beautiful. I am all about period care as well, sustainable and non-toxic period care. We're gonna have to
Yes.
do another episode later on, all on that. But I have had such an incredible time speaking with you. Honestly, I feel like we could go for like a whole nother hour, but for the sake of time, I think we should probably cut it here. Is there anything though that I didn't ask you that you want to say to the listeners? Maybe something that's on your heart, on your mind that you want to ensure that you have an opportunity to say?
Oh, thank you for giving me the space. I feel like we have covered so much, honestly. I love that, like, we went, gosh, from the beginning of my journey from, pre TV to now um, you know, post TV, I guess, like this like new era. So I feel like we've covered a lot, but
Great.
I share a lot on my Instagram and on my LinkedIn. So if people are interested in those stories, in what's next, they can definitely find me on those two platforms.
Perfect. And those are both linked down below in the show notes. So, for those of you listening, if you took anything away from this podcast, which I'm sure you did, but whatever was your favorite moment of the podcast, please take a screenshot of the podcast episode and ensure that you tag us both because we want to see what it is that stood out to you. And thank you all so much for listening, and we will be in touch. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. Make sure to visit theericacruz.com. That's Erica with a K, where you can subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. You can help this podcast grow by supporting me with an Apple Podcast rate and review. If you took anything away from this episode, I invite you to take a screenshot and share it on social media so that your favorite badass Latinas can also check it out. Be sure to tag me at the Erica Cruz. That's Erica with a K because you know I want to see it. If you're ready to join the revolution and be a part of the Courage Driven Latina community, visit couragedrivenlatina.com to get more information and join the waitlist. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.